From Ronaldo's red card to Liverpool's epic late win against PSG, the Champions League is well and truly back. So today we're going to look at all 32 teams in this year's competition and look at their best ever performance in Europe's elite competition. Atletico Madrid runners-up. Always the bridesmaid, never the bride, Atletico Madrid have never won Europe's premier competition despite their best efforts. Their first fall at the final hurdle came in 1974, but the next two European finals would be 40 years later under Diego Simeone. Atleti made the final in 2014 and 2016, but both times were beaten by rivals Real Madrid, first losing in extra time and then going all the way to penalties 2 years later. Borussia Dortmund winners. They may have come up short a few years ago against Bayern Munich in the Wembley final, but that wasn't their only experience of a Champions League final. In 1997 they managed to get the job done, beating Juventus 3-1, in Munich of all places. A star-studded Juve side including the likes of Zidane, Vieri, Deschamps and Del Piero were beaten by a Dortmund team that included Paul Lambert. Just have a think about that. Monaco runners-up. The French side made it to the final in 2004 in what was an incredible journey that saw them knock out both Real Madrid and Chelsea before meeting Porto in the final. Two dark horses made it to the final, but it was Jose Mourinho's Porto side who triumphed, beating Monaco 3-0 in Gelsenkirchen. Monaco had some exciting players that year, but that team wasn't a patch on the one that made it to the semis in 2017. Club Brugge runners-up. Yes, even Club Brugge have made it to a European Cup final. The Belgians did it way back in 1978, where they would take on reigning champions Liverpool at Wembley. On home soil the Reds triumphed 1-0, and Brugge have never come close again since. Nowadays just making the group stage is a triumph for Club Brugge, who are probably just there for the ride this season. Barcelona winners. I mean, this one wasn't hard to work out. Barca have lifted the Champions League 5 times in their history, with their first coming as late as 1992. It was the 2000s where Barca really started to dominate European football, winning the Champions League again in 2006, 2009, 2011 and 2015. But since they beat Juventus in 2015, Barca have never made it past the quarter-finals, which is pretty shocking for a side of their quality. Can Messi change that this season? Inter Milan winners. Inter are finally back in the Champions League this season and returned with a late show against Tottenham, but they do have a rich history in the competition. Their first European Cup came in 1964 and they followed up a year later with another one in 1965. However, it will be a long wait for the third European crown as Jose Mourinho incredibly won the Champions League once again, beating Bayern Munich in 2010. Since then, no Italian team has won the competition. Tottenham semi-finals. Finally we have a team who haven't made it to a Champions League final. While Spurs do have an exciting team right now, they've struggled to crack the Champions League nut, and their best ever performance in the competition came way back in 1962. Spurs came close to making it to the final in fairness, but were beaten by Benfica 4-3 on aggregate. Will they go one better this season and make it to the final? I know I won't be putting my money on it. PSV Eindhoven winners. Dutch football is no longer what it once was, but there was a time when they could produce a European Cup winner. In 1988, it was PSV Eindhoven's turn to reach the top of the European mountain, beating Benfica in the final. They would need penalties to do it though, with the game finishing 0-0 after extra time. PSV's first penalty was scored by none other than Ronald Koeman, who we've recently seen in the Premier League with Southampton and then Everton. Liverpool winners. 5-time winners, Liverpool are England's most successful team in Europe, winning it more than any other side in the country. The Reds would dominate in the late 70s and early 80s, winning the trophy in 77, 78, 81 and 84, but arguably their most historic win would be in 2005, where Rafa Benitez's team came from 3-0 down to beat AC Milan on penalties, in a game that saw Jerzy Dudek channel his inner Bruce Grobbelaar and players such as Jimmy Traore got their hands on Europe's biggest prize. It was an odd but brilliant night in Istanbul. PSG semi-final. For all their riches, PSG have never been able to go all the way in Europe. The likes of Neymar were brought in to propel the parasite to the European summit, but the quarterfinals is as far as they've been able to go. However, in 1995 they were able to go one further, and that was before they could buy whoever they want. PSG would reach the semi-final, where they would lose 3-0 to AC Milan 23 years ago, and they probably won't go that far this year. Napoli round of 16. Our worst performers so far, you'd think the side of Napoli's quality might have gone a bit further in Europe, but it's only really been in recent years that they've become a side to be feared. They've twice reached the round of 16, first in 2012 and then again in 2017, losing to Chelsea and then Real Madrid, with both teams going on to win the whole competition. So maybe Napoli have just had bad draws when it comes to the Champions League. Red Star Belgrade winners. The team who are billed as the whipping boys of a tough Group C, Red Star Belgrade can actually say they've done something that Napoli and PSG haven't, winning the European Cup in 1991. Red Star's journey to the final saw them topple Grasshoppers, Rangers, Dynamo Dresden and Bayern Munich before being beaten by Marseille in the final on penalties. Galatasaray semi-final. The Turkish Giants made it all the way to the semis in 1989, where they got hammering off Steaua Bucharest, who advanced to the final 5-1 on aggregate. While their group has given them a good chance of advancing to the knockout stages this season, it's going to be hard to see Gala replicating their success of 1989, let alone bettering it. Porto winners. We mentioned one of Porto's triumphs earlier, but they've in fact won the trophy twice. The Portuguese side first won the European Cup in 1987 when they beat Bayern Munich, scoring 2 goals in 3 minutes to come from behind to win 2-1. Their second European triumph is much more well known and truly signified the beginning of the Special One era for Jose Mourinho, an era that is no longer as pretty as it once was. Schalke semi-finals. The German side don't have a big history in the Champions League, spending more than 40 years away from the competition after their debut in 1958. But despite only appearing in 9 European Cups, Schalke have actually made it all the way to the semi-finals. That came in 2011, where they would lose to Manchester United 6-1 on aggregate. It was an exciting Schalke side that included some real greats of the game, but the semis were as far as they would go. Lokomotiv Moscow round of 16. In what was a real surprise, Lokomotiv Moscow made it out of the group stage in 2004, finishing above Inter Milan to come second in Group B. The draw for the first knockout round pitted them against Monaco, where away goals would be the undoing of the Russian side, who exited the competition at the hands of the eventual runners-up. Ajax winners. As previously mentioned, Dutch sides used to be pretty successful in Europe, and no Dutch side has been more successful than Ajax. Amazingly, the Amsterdam-based side have won the European Cup 4 times, winning 3 in a row from 1971 and 1973. Their most recent triumph came in 1995, winning the final 1-0. Having already met AC Milan in the group stage, the pair would meet again in the final in Vienna, with Patrick Kluivert grabbing the only goal of the game. Bayern Munich winners. Ajax's hat-trick of European victories was ended by Bayern Munich, who themselves went on to complete a treble of wins. 1974, 75 and 76 saw the Bavarians lift the cup, and they've since won it twice more, beating Valencia in 2001 and then Borussia Dortmund in 2013. They've also lost multiple finals in recent years, falling to both Inter Milan and Chelsea. Benfica winners. In the early stages of the European Cup, Benfica were one of the best teams around, and in 1961 they would get their hands on the trophy before retaining it a year later against Real Madrid in a thrilling cup final. Despite a Puskás hat-trick, Benfica were able to triumph 5-3, with the legendary Eusebio getting on the score sheet. They would nearly win 3 in a row, losing to AC Milan in the 1963 final the following year. AEK Athens quarter-finals. As the years have gone by, AEK Athens have featured less and less in the Champions League, finally returning to the group stage this season for the first time since the 2006-2007 campaign. But way back in 1969, big up Brian Adams, AEK reached the quarter-finals of the European Cup, where they would lose 3-2 on aggregate to Spartak Trnava. Lyon semi-finals. While they've already made a splash in this season's competition by beating Man City at the Etihad, they've got a long way to go to beat their best ever Champions League performance. 8 years ago they made it all the way from the playoffs to the semi-finals, knocking out Liverpool in the group stage and then eliminating Real Madrid in the first knockout round. However, Bayern Munich in the semis would be a step too far for a Lyon side that included the likes of Hugo Lloris and Miralem Pjanic. Hoffenheim, the group stage. This is only the second time in Hoffenheim's history that they've made it into the Champions League, and they've already gone one step further this season. Last year they lost a playoff to Liverpool, but this time they would reach the group stages automatically, and they kicked off with the 2-2 draw against Shakhtar Donetsk. Manchester City semi-finals. The club had basically no Champions League history before Sheikh Mansour took over, competing in the competition just once way back in 1968. But in 2016, they had their best ever performance in the Champions League, reaching the semi-finals of a competition that they'd really struggled in. Manuel Pellegrini's side would end up losing to Real Madrid, suffering a 1-0 aggregate defeat to end their European dreams. However, with Pep Guardiola now in charge, people now expect City to do much better in the Champions League. Shakhtar Donetsk quarter-finals. The Ukrainian side have boasted some great South American talent in years gone by, and that talent got Shakhtar all the way to the quarter-finals in 2011, having come top of the group that included Arsenal and then knocking out Roma. But in the quarters they would be humbled, losing 6-1 to eventual winners Barcelona. Real Madrid winners. I mean, of course you know Real Madrid have won it. All they do is win it. Even when they don't play very well, they win it. They've won it 13 times now, with the first being in 1956 and their most recent this year against Liverpool. Can anyone stop them this time though? CSKA Moscow quarterfinals. Most times CSKA have been in the competition, they've struggled to get past the group stages, but they did that and more in 2010. After coming second behind Manchester United in their group, they beat Sevilla over 2 legs to make it to the quarterfinals. It was there where the journey ended though, suffering in 2 1-0 defeats to the pragmatic Jose Mourinho and his eventual winners Inter Milan. Victoria Pilsen group stage. This is the third time Victoria Pilsen have made it to the group stages of the competition, and each time they've been handed a tough group. In 2011 and 2013 they came third in their group, so can they do better this time out, or is third just their glass ceiling? Roma runners-up. They were semi-finalists last year, losing to Liverpool, and it was the Reds who beat them in the final way back in 1984. To this date that is Roma's only European Cup final, and it was a game that saw Bruce Grobbelaar's wobbly legs get their first outing. Just like in 2005 they worked, and Liverpool beat an Italian side on penalties to win the European Cup. Manchester United winners. The Red Devils have won the European Cups 3 times in their history, with 1999 the most famous of the lot. A late comeback against a Bayern Munich side saw Sir Alex Ferguson's team complete a famous treble thanks to goals from Teddy Sheringham and Ole Gunnar Solskjaer. 2008 was the last time Manchester United won the Champions League, beating Chelsea in an all-Premier League affair on a wet night in Russia. Juventus winners. While Gianluigi Buffon wasn't able to lift the Champions League with Juventus, they have done so in the past, twice in fact. Their first win came in 1985, and 11 years later they would do it again in 1996, beating an incredibly strong Ajax side on penalties. It's amazing to see how many European finals are actually ended on penalties, isn't it? Valencia runners-up. The Spanish side have never won Europe's greatest honour, but they've came mighty close. In fact, Valencia have twice reached the Champions League final, first in 2000 and then again in 2001, in what was a golden year for the club that would eventually see silverware in coming years. In 2000 they would be beaten by Real Madrid 3-0, and a year later it would take penalties for Bayern Munich to triumph. Penalties again. And finally, Young Boys, the semi-finals. I mean, there's got to be a joke in there somewhere about Young Boys and semis, but I'm certainly not going to make it. So way back in 1959, Swiss side Young Boys amazingly reached the Champions League semi-final. And that's all I'm going to say before I say something inappropriate. So that's every Champions League club's best ever performance in Europe. Let us know what you think in the comments below. Thanks for watching and don't forget to like, share and subscribe.